my name is Helen Shoemaker, and I did my final presentation over Lindsay Corporation. Just a quick overview of the company. It's actually a Nebraska company. It is headquartered in Omaha, Nebraska, and if you just head down Highway 91, if you hit Albion, you've gone too far, but if you hit a little town named Lindsay, its manufacturing plant is right there. Just a brief overview. Paul Zimmerman started the company. His sons created their first somatic center pivot in 1960. The company created several irrigation systems in between the 60s and the 90s, but their major advancement happened in the 90s in the technology. With the technology boom, they integrated their system and named it AIMS, which is an automated irrigation management system, and basically it used a control panel to allow farmers to control the water and chemicals and fertilization that was put on the crops. So between the 1990s and 2000s, they really focused on using technology to better their products, and they still continue to do so today. But out in the 2000s, they started acquiring companies to grow themselves. So in 2002, they opened their own South African plant, as well as acquired the U.S.-based irrigation company and one in Brazil. They began operations in China in 2005 and made the jump into the construction machinery industry in 2006. In recent years, they've just tried to expand this operation, and they've acquired several companies to do so. Looking at the strengths and weaknesses of Lindsay Corporation, some of the major strengths, they've increased dividends 28% this year, and its liquidity, solvency, profitability measures, and asset management measures are extremely well. If you want to take a look at some of these comparisons, you'll notice that Lindsay's doing great as compared to debt to equity, their debt to assets. An important thing to notice with the debt to asset is that Lindsay is using debt to finance its growth. But since it is making a profit and enough revenue to cover its financing charges, that is really a good thing. Looking at the liquidity ratios, the important thing to notice here is the difference between the quick ratio and the current ratio. The current ratio includes inventory, and the quick ratio does not. If you notice, like AGCO and Deere & Company is John Deere. I use those two companies because they were well known. But the quick ratio uses inventory, or takes inventory out. So when you're looking at liquidity, inventory is the least liquid asset. So when a company has a lot of its liquid assets tied up in inventory, if sales don't go the way they plan, they have a harder time meeting their bills. Their profitability ratios are doing well compared to the industry. In fact, one of the most important things to notice in these ratios is the return on equity, and they're making about $4 more than the industry average. If you can look at AGCO, which is a more specified company in the ag industry, they're doing about industry average, and John Deere, which is a broader company, is doing much, much better. A huge thing for Lindsay is that they were offered a $39 million contract with the Middle East. That will help them in the upcoming years as far as bringing revenue. The backlog of unfilled contract is a big thing. They've upped that 87% compared to the last quarter. Its weaknesses is its seasonality. Their first quarter is very, very slow, and the third quarter overlaps both their irrigation sections and their machinery divisions. So another thing that I've noticed is that several sources, including Value Line, commented that their revenues may be being realized in the wrong quarters, which is against general accounting principles. I was not able to find any of this in their annual reports or any statistical information saying they did, but it is mentioned in several sources. The price to book ratio is statistically much lower than the overall industry, but compared to the other competitors that I chose to look at because they were bigger names, they aren't doing too terrible. The infrastructure division is statistically lower year after year. In fact, Market Watch says that they are consistently dropping about 15% in their sales. Drought conditions in the U.S., although they were terrible last year, has helped Lindsay because farmers now realize that they need a consistent source of irrigation. Developing countries are in need of infrastructure, and as long as Lindsay can keep its costs low enough that these countries can afford their products, they will be used. European standardization, just recently, Europe is standardizing its road safety, and when developing, it'll be easier for Lindsay to get larger contracts because if they're with several states or several nations, they'll be able to use the same they'll be able to use the same products without having to redo or reevaluate their measures. Some major threats to Lindsay is the USDA does predict that there will be a lower demand for agricultural commodities, which will make it harder for Lindsay to sell its irrigation systems, which is predominantly its major seller. The government purse strings are a lot tighter in the last couple of years because of the economic downturn. Due to this, governments are cutting spending on infrastructure products, which could cause Lindsay's infrastructure division to statistically drop in sales. As far as recommendations for the company, the most important thing for them is to really keep costs low, because that is going to make the difference of whether they're getting contracts, whether it's with the U.S. or with developing countries or even in Europe. They are and have acknowledged that they are trying to expand into the infrastructure market. The problem with this is that they are consistently performing below others in the industry. By cutting costs and making sure that they are performing up to the state standards, they'll be able to infiltrate that market more. And again, a big opportunity for them is to capitalize on the European standardization. Seasonality. With the products that they are in, there is really no way of getting around this unless they can find a way to have people put in orders during their slow seasons, which would be more the first quarter and the second quarter. A big thing that they really need to figure out is whether they're recognizing their revenues at the correct time. General accounting principles really need to be followed, and it makes it a lot easier for analysis and for investors to want to invest with a company that they feel is safe. And if they're not following good practices, it's really hard for investors and analysis to give them good reviews. As far as its infrastructure division, it is a weak link for Lindsay, but it is brand new. I mean, starting in 2006. So they really need to take a look at that and make sure that they are making products that they can afford to make cheaply and with quality.